Let's go! I am fired up for today's video because we're chatting Garrett Nussmeier, but I get this comment all the time. Walker Howard's coming. Maybe Nuss with Max and Myles ahead of him. He may never take a snap at LSU, but hold on just a second. Have you not watched our content this week? We're going to factor in what we've learned about high school football stats and have a discussion about Walker Howard's future. So let's get to it. Let's go. Here's what we're going to do. Let's sort it based on your recruiting ranking. And you see here the recruiting ranking at a high school. Garrett Nussmeier is one of the highest rated LSU quarterbacks ever, period. And look, obviously Ryan Perrilloux and Russell Shepard. Shepard obviously never played QB. Jamarcus Russell, Brennan Harris, Garrett Nussmeier, Rob Bolden. So you see here, unlike our wide receiver piece where we showed the correlation with top 100 recruits that play wide receiver at LSU. If you want to see that, the correlation is absolutely nuts. You know you want to. As far as guessing which true freshman wide receiver are going to be great, it's different at quarterback, obviously, because you see this, and you see that it doesn't always work out, even if you're a high-level quarterback recruit. And what you see here is Max Johnson was a different type of four-star. He was 253, and it's pretty wild, the gap between the two of them. So the recruiting evaluators even see Garrett Nussmeier as having a higher ceiling. Now, of course, we can always talk about supporting cast. Obviously, Marcus High School had a great coaching staff. Garrett Nussmeier, the son, of course, of a former NFL and college OC. But, yes, they had great weapons. They had J. Michael Sturdivant, who's a great wide receiver, a four-star who went to California. But still, even if you sort on column, the best stats out of all the college quarterbacks that have come to LSU, you notice Nuss is one of 5 that have gone to LSU that averaged minimum 4 touchdowns per game as a senior. Now, before we move on to Nuss's other stats, I was not able to get his final rushing stats, but I was able to see on his first 3 senior games, he had 54 yards rushing and 1 touchdown. So we didn't get the final 6 games, but if you average a rushing touchdown every 3 games, I went on ahead and gave Nuss 2 more rushing touchdowns, which we'll get to in just a second. So, as you see here, every single one of these guys that averaged at least 4 rushing touchdowns a game were pretty daggum good college quarterbacks, okay? Lindsey Scott, of course, at Nicholls State, not quite at LSU, but, there's a gap between Scott and Nussmeier when it comes to actual prospects, and then, obviously, Joe Burrow, Myles Brennan, and look, we can argue all the time about Ryan Perrilloux's success at LSU. He would have killed it. He would have absolutely killed it. And we'll do a different video on Ryan Perrilloux one day. There's more to his story that meets the eye. So, obviously, 4 touchdowns. Now, Nuss's senior stats, once again, highest level of high school football basically you can get in Texas. Average yards per game. Once again, the same group that averaged a high amount of touchdowns is still the top 5 in average yards per game. It's pretty incredible. And you see the names ahead of them. Okay? Completions per game. Nuss is number 1. Completions per game. Pretty daggum impressive, huh? Let's move it over here so you can see it a little better. 23.6, okay? See Myles Brennan, Hayden Reddick, Ryan Perrilloux, Jamarcus Russell, Joe Burrow. If you go look at completion percentage, sort on column, and boom. Garrett Nussmeier, highest completion percentage of any senior quarterback that has ever come to LSU. In fact, there are only 2 over 70%, and that other guy was okay. Good to see Joe back healthy. And look, are you kidding me? Garrett Nussmeier, I'm getting so excited about this guy. I mean, I am really impressed. And we're going to do some Garrett film study. His intangibles are off the charts. I just want to include this really quickly. When Jontre Kirkland fumbled in the spring game from a dart from Garrett Nussmeier, Garrett sprinted over there and helped him up. And those things, we'll touch on that when we do some Nuss film study. But what I want to do is, yes, we know all these amazing statistics. He is number one in completion percentage out of any LSU senior high school quarterback. He is number one in completions per game, top 5 in yards, top five in touchdowns. You guys saw that. But then if you go to yards per completion, Nuss is actually closer to the bottom. These are the top few right here. I wasn't able to compile this data for Jennings and Jefferson, but Scott, Harris, Burrow, and TJ Finley. And look, we're talking about TJ's high school day. We'll touch on it in just a second. But when TJ did complete a pass with the cannon that he has, he was driving the football down the field, which is what you want. Now, of course, you then sort this data. Garrett Nussmeier is actually bottom 5 in yards per completion, which in high school it really can be a misleading stat because, if you throw the football out quick and a receiver breaks like 20 tackles and takes the ball 80 yards on a screen, that can obviously inflate a quarterback's yards per completion. So I'm a little bit more skeptical of that in high school, especially since, we don't have time to watch each and every game. But there is also another reason why I think Garrett Nussmeier's yards per completion are actually a little bit lower, and it's going to get a little technical here. Look, the one comparison I kept making to Garrett Nussmeier was Zach Wilson, the quarterback out of BYU who just got drafted. They are very similar type of guys. Now, I don't think Nuss is as athletic as Wilson, who is, an incredible athlete, but I think he's pretty close. It wasn't necessarily because Garrett Nussmeier wasn't driving the football down the field. But if you watch his high school tape, this is going to be something Jake Peets is going to work with Garrett Nussmeier on, and I'm just going to touch on it briefly because we are going to do some Nuss film study. Nuss in high school would drift away from the line of scrimmage. And the Johnny Manziels of the world, the Zach Wilsons of the world, they tend to do that because they're playmakers. They like to make plays off script. Nuss is big time on this. Like, he'll drift sometimes 10, sometimes 12 yards behind the line of scrimmage. So when you do that, it increases the distance that you actually have to throw the football through the air. And when you do that, you're actually completing it. Let's say you drift 12 yards behind the line of scrimmage and you throw a football 22 yards down the field. That is still just a 10-yard completion. So I think that did have an impact on Garrett Nussmeier because he would twist and turn, sometimes run 30 yards backwards and throw the football for a 7-yard gain, which would be an amazing play. So obviously, we'll touch on that in the film study. I think that did cause him to have a lower yards per completion. Also, I do want to touch on the high completion percentage. One myth about playmaking quarterbacks like Garrett Nussmeier and Zach Wilson, if you go take a look at the top completion percentage quarterbacks, you see Mac Jones and Zach Wilson were 1 and 2, despite those two being diametrically different quarterbacks. Mac Jones, of course, is a rhythm in pocket thrower. Zach Wilson, of course, is a spectacular playmaker like Nuss. The thing that people get mistaken about playmaking quarterbacks like that is that they're gunslingers. They're Brett Favre that throw a lot of picks, when the opposite is actually true. Quarterbacks that run around a lot like Nuss, even though they don't throw the football on time, they're going to throw the football to a guy that's wide open. So when Nuss is scrambling, he's waiting for a receiver to just get wide open when they would break off their routes and when the defense can't cover the guys as long as possible. So, that's the thing about his completion percentage. It could be really high simply because Nuss was so good at making plays such as that, which is why the completion percentage could also, on the other side, be just a little bit misleading because, as you'll see when we actually do Nuss film studies, you just simply cannot do some of the things that Nuss did in high school versus college defensive ends that are faster than you, that will bring you down quickly. So Yes, Nuss is going to make a lot of ridiculous plays if he gets a shot to start at LSU, but ultimately, there's going to have to be some of that cut out, and you're going to have to just sometimes in the pocket take the 7-yard out route and just take those yards and keep moving along. And look, you don't want to take too much playmaking out of his game, but you still want to try and reel that in just a little bit, just so you're not suffering just absolutely huge losses per se. So it is interesting that Nuss's stats are amazing. I do think they're the real deal. I really do. Now let's talk about this Walker Howard guy. And you guys have seen me on videos recently say that I think he's going to lead LSU to a college football playoff. I think he's going to be so undeniably good that he might be the starter by year 2 in his development. And then, we get into the discussion about how all of that is actually going to work out. But, this, of course, is Walker Howard's stats from his junior season. You see here, 35 touchdowns, only 4 picks. Factor in his 3 rushing touchdowns. His rushing stats very similar to that of Nuss. And 35, let's do some quick math. In 9 games, 35 plus 3, 38. That is over 4 touchdowns a game. Major check mark. 66% completion. Obviously, that is very good. Nuss was better in that aspect, but still, this is pretty good stuff for a junior in high school. Now, of course, Walker Howard had Jack Bech to throw the football to, but there was, if you actually watch Walker Howard, his tape is just simply incredible. And the funny thing about him is all of this, all of the hype, all of the offers, and all those things happened before he ever had a varsity start. So that's something that's really fascinating about Walker Howard, is that he did not start his sophomore season. There was a Eli Holstein, who went to Louisiana Tech. There was a Division I quarterback that was already ahead of him. Now, as many of you know, and this goes for Nuss, this goes for anyone, Ryan Perilou, whoever, I don't think true freshman quarterback should ever start. And we'll touch on that in just a second, and if you watch our content, you probably already know what I'm going to say in just a second. But yeah, Walker Howard, he's got everything you want out of a quarterback. Runs a 4.6 40, so he's a little bit more dual threat. The thing I like about him and Nuss is, while both of them are fast, obviously I think Walker Howard's a better athlete, they both like to throw the football. They both keep their eyes downfield. And the thing that I really like about Walker Howard is, when you watch him, you see a lot of throws that will translate to the college game. And, something else is Walker Howard did play a lot of shotgun out of empty, which is something the 2019 LSU offense did. And when a free blitzer would occasionally get to Walker Howard, he would not only make the blitzer miss, but throw the football still in a timely fashion. Once again, I've said everything I've said about Walker Howard in the past, and I'm not walking back from it. I really do think he's special. I really do, and I think he will lead LSU to a college football playoff. But I'm going to keep, and I shared this in the live streams, and that's why live streams are so great. It's me and you and all of us just having a big LSU discussion, and I know I promote him a lot. I did share in the live stream, and I'll share it again right here. My study on Monday changed my outlook on the entire LSU quarterback position, to the point that I am more willing to say Garrett Nussmeier is going to get his chance to start. So I'll link the study on Monday down below, and what we'll do here is compare Garrett, Myles, and Max's high school stats, because they're obviously, the 3 current quarterbacks. We do not have Walker Howard's senior stats yet because he's yet to play his senior season. It is going to be very interesting to follow up the phenomenal season he had last season, obviously without Jack Bech. But I will be interested to see if Walker Howard dominates even more as a senior. And that is really fascinating to me, because so much, like we shared on Monday, of your high school recruiting evaluation comes from 7-on-7, comes from camps. And a lot of that is very subjective. It's very anecdotal to a certain extent. Outside factors could influence how you rate a recruit, like if you run a 4.4 and you're a quarterback, or if you have a super cannon arm and you're a quarterback. And what I think happened, and when I started looking at more and more high school stats, there is a disconnect between how you actually perform as an actual high school quarterback and your actual recruiting ranking. And I think there's a lot of different reasons as to why, but I want to show you the stats here. And that's the very interesting thing about Walker Howard, and this is a good example. He's actually lived up to the expectation, which was really tough for him because he had yet to start as a high school varsity quarterback, and he was already one of the highest rated Louisiana quarterbacks of all time. So for him to follow up with that pressure and go undefeated in a difficult level of high school football in Louisiana lets you know even more how special of a kid he is. But once again, I am very excited to see his senior high school statistics. Now, what we have here are the three current quarterbacks currently grouped together. And one of the big takeaways from the piece on Monday is that there is that disconnect. Not all high school quarterbacks that are highly rated dominate at the high school level. And what we learned is Garrett Nussmeier and Myles Brennan dominated as seniors in high school, and Max Johnson and TJ Finley did not. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to end up being a dominant college starter. Matt Flynn wasn't all that dominant as a high school senior either. And once again, I'll share that one stat. There is only one stat that proves time and time again to prove LSU quarterbacks will succeed. I'll share that in just a second. But you're looking at the high school stats here, and you notice if we sort it by yards, okay, what you'll see is something quite fascinating. Myles Brennan, his senior season of high school, 3,982 yards. Garrett Nussmeier, 2,815. And despite Max Johnson playing 6 more games than Nuss and 3 more games than Myles, if the stats on Max Preps and LSUsports.com are accurate, which I'm guessing that they are, Max still threw for 400 yards less than Nuss in 6 fewer games and 1,500 yards less than Myles in 3 more games, which is pretty interesting. And, if you factor in Max Johnson's performance as a junior, where he completed 39% of his passes, it's just interesting to see. Now, obviously, Max Johnson played well in his 2 starts. His Florida performance was the best start by any LSU quarterback last season. But, if you say, well, Max was more of an underneath thrower, well, it's interesting because his completion percentage is also significantly lower than that of Myles or Garrett. And let's be honest, Georgia high school football is really competitive, but still, it's fascinating. How much do you factor that in? With Max, he showed me a lot last season, and he still is, for right now, currently my QB1. But there are a few things that have changed my views on the current LSU quarterback position, and it's causing me to reevaluate a few things about who should be the starter next season. I do want to throw this one thing in. While Nuss's stats are absolutely fantastic, the game he missed as a senior was a playoff game, and that's why a lot of people were expecting Marcus to make a run for it, for a state championship. Nuss got hurt and he couldn't perform, and that obviously really stinks because we lost some games of sample, and obviously I hated it for Marcus High School. I'm kind of like a fan of theirs now. Their jerseys are cool and whatever. But, you look at Max, he had a rough playoff game at the end of his senior career, and the same thing is true with TJ. He had a rough game against Destrehan, and that obviously hurt their stats. How much of Garrett's stats would have been hurt if he had played that final game? Would he have done good or bad? And if he had played that game, how many more games would Marcus have played? I don't know. I do feel like that is important in this context. But overall, a 9-game sample is still a pretty large size, especially considering the competition Marcus was playing against. So I know a lot of you are asking, well, maybe Nuss should start as a true freshman. Well, I want you to see this one stat. I guarantee you it'll change your mind how you view not only Nuss, but the situation TJ was thrown into, the situation Max was thrown into, and how LSU quarterbacks in the past and present and future could be affected by this one stat, okay? It is Power Hour LSU. Boom! Leftover tacos. Let's go.